The right wing is an Aero, the left wing is an Aero, the rudder and 2 elevators are aeros. A-E-R-O, Aero. You define your plane as a list of arrows, as many as you like. For each arrow you provide 4 points in a very specific order, which in this case would be 0, 1, 2, 3, and in this case it would be 0, 1, 2, 3. You also give me for each arrow surface a control type, and you basically tell me I'd like this controlled as if it were a wing or a rudder or a elevator. And basically that tells me I will, in response to a control input, I will deform the wing shape. I will rotate some portion of the wing shape. Basically I will move the leading edge, and I'll move it up either in the X, the Y, or the Z based on where or not you told me you wanted it to be a rudder-like or a elevator-like or a wing-like object. If you give it to me as a negative number, that kind of implies it's on the left side of the plane, but what it really means is whatever forces I compute from it, I'm to invert them. So on an elevator, you don't do that because you want the elevator on both sides to work the same. But the wings, I'm trying to get a roll out of them. So basically, if I twist one of them up, I need to twist the other one down. This point is the center of lift. And again, don't learn aerodynamics from me. This is just what I call it. The center of lift for this arrow and center of lift for that arrow. So at the point of lift, there is this purple line going down, which is normal at right angles to the wing. And then the orange line is actually in the plane of the wing facing forward. If I look at it from the side, then the angle between the blue line and the orange line is the angle of attack. And if I pitch up or down, I'm scared to do it because I might lose the synchronization. I'll do it in a minute. It's flying very stably right now. I don't want to mess it up. So that angle of attack is where the magic comes from. But when you have 0 angle of attack, there is 0 lift, because your thin little board is just going straight into the wind. Anyway, the gray line is the drag, the amount of the aero surface that's exposed to the direction of flight. This is like a fairly low drag moment in time for this wing, because it's mostly edge on to the wind. But you know, drag is drag, and it's pushing back on me with that much force. First change is this X box in the upper hand corner of the control window. So it can now be minimized, or it can be in game mode, which is just the mini-map and this selection of buttons. And then back to the very full edit mode. But for this, we want to be in game mode. Well, in game mode, you also have the regular navigation stick and what would be the weapon trigger, but we are given a special weapon, an anti-gravity beam, that allows us we can use that as a landing engine. So right now we're in orbit, so we would normally be moving pretty fast. And so we just came in from space, and we're kind of low right now. So normally, just having come in, we'd be looking like this, and then we would slow down. And at this point, we're flying around in sort of what I call UFO mode. You just drag this wheel in the direction you wish you were going, and eventually you'll be going that direction. And when you're up high, you can go really fast. Has a couple of new things. So here's my wireframe, so you can see the tessellation, how it changes as we move along. So we get more detail about the area that we're looking at. Wireframe mode. This is green mode, where there is no color map. There are just vertex colors. My elevation colors, where white for snow caps. Now I've got a new mode called unlit, and this shows you what the that color map really looks like without the vertex colors also shading it. Right. This is the shaded height map. That's what you call this, a shaded height map. And then a new thing called illuminated. And what I do here is I'm using the terrain elevation colors, so sandy by the ocean and rocky, snowy up at high elevations, and greens in the middle. But I'm blending it with that high resolution image as the grayscale, as the shading. And so I get a shaded version of the green world. So now if I fire my engines, I don't know, well, we'll just stop. So now we're going to fall straight down. And this is what my engines look like. There's a little fire near the beginning. And they start off with some velocity. Also, I'm going up. You can tell I'm going up because you can see my altitude over here. Now I'm going down. And because I'm going down, there's a bunch of red text underneath. That 36 seconds, that's how many seconds till I hit the ground if I don't do anything about it. So I'm trying to get a positive velocity, and boof, there, now I'm positive velocity. And a really hard landing, you would lose more life than just a rough landing. But it does mean that you've now landed on the planet without a full charge, and the smoke is pulled away by the wind. Goodbye wind, goodbye smoke. So if we were a sailboat, that's the direction we'd be going. The engines are inefficient, so in addition to giving off smoke, they also drop what I call is lava. And this stuff is really hot. And eventually, it's going to heat up the ground, and any plants growing on the ground that gets hot enough will burn up and turn into charcoal, which will be an ingredient. And any lava that cools naturally over time will turn into iron. And if you somehow conspire to have the lava fall into water, like the ocean, but maybe also in the case of raindrops, individual raindrops, I'm thinking maybe it'll turn into steel instead of iron. And so that's, 2 for 1 in the resource parade. So you would fly your poorly shielded engine. Well, hey there, kitten. You would fly your poorly shielded engine over areas where you wanted there to be a stream of lava. I mean, the lava is going to find the path downhill. Anyway, so there'd just be little bits of steel lying here and there that you then go pick up. So I turn my engines on, off and on to kind of build up a big pile of smoke down here at the bottom. Puff, 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 puff. And I should probably have the wind not take effect, within like, I don't know, a meter of the ground or something, but I don't want to break sailboats. Okay. It just kind of occurred to me that, that was a false memory probably. So there I am, taking off, bloom, bloom, bloom. And as I go up, this scale kind of compresses. You can see the blue sky. Blue sky, I'm the white line. I'm almost into the sky. Into the sky. If I were to stop now, I would still fall to Earth. But once I cross into the black, I'm back in space. And now, poof, okay. So now I'm just barely in space. I can keep going up if I want to. But I think by now I'm completely out of the atmosphere, and so I can go really fast. And now I can slow down, stop, and when I hit stop, not only does it stop me, but it also turns off my gravity damper, and so basically it's my re-entry engine burn. It's a vertical strip where the colors represent the different terrain colors near the ocean, near the sky, and up in space. And if I fire the engine, and so I'm right now at 353 meters, which is ground elevation. I'm on the ground at 353 meter elevation ground. As soon as I take off, it's now white. I'm up 16 meters. I'm up 25 meters. And above it, we see positive green meters per second, my vertical speed upwards. If I start to fall, then the number goes below, and it goes negative. Look at all that lava I'm dropping. I got a lot of lava behaviors to implement. It's like every particle, just needs to have a way for new ones to come into the universe and a way for them to leave, and something they can mutate into when they die. And so each particle can be like 3 or 4 base resources that you can collect and then craft with. So these cloud particles, or these smoke particles, they just hardcore disappear after a minute, which is pretty satisfying. It's one thing about a nice dark planet. Yeah, so there's the smoke, but we see it delayed because the speed with which it expands. So that's probably not too bad. Whoa! Okay, I just made a little change here that to the fractal surface generator, that after I generate the fractal surface, I measure its maximum and minimum values, and then I do a binary search to find the elevation at which the percentage of the map that is land is greater than X, where X is a tweak value. And right now I've got it set to 75%. So basically it readjusts sea level so as to give me 75% of the map being land. And the idea is that'll be a tweak value that the star map author can provide. So you provide a random seed number and a percentage land number, and it then generates whatever you want. I don't have a slider yet. I don't have any way of actually changing the value. It's just baked in at 75%. added a little flight simulator sub mode in my effort to support multiple vehicles, and there's a new control in town, the throttle. Pretty simple, it's just 0 to 100%. The throttle only appears when you're driving a vehicle that needs one. But once we go on planet, and now you have a totally different camera, much easier to use. Anyway, so you're in a UFO mode, and other players who are in orbit on this planet, in theory we could encounter them and interact with them. And in theory we can interact with things on the surface, and we can zoom in and see stuff in the distance. But when we tap the stop button, it's going to drop us out of UFO mode and put us into flight simulator mode. And the way we know we're in flight simulator mode is this little vector basis appears, because the green bar should be our forward direction. The only rotation I'm supporting at the moment is yaw. So let's see if that works. So the red line should come around, point behind us. So what should happen though is, as I yaw around, my energy from the throttle should be in the direction of the green vector. Okay, anyway, so the idea is that as I fly around, this little vector basis will show me the orientation of the plane, and eventually I will couple the orientation of the critter to the orientation of the plane, because the critter is effectively sitting in the plane. The plane may just be a pair of wings that the critter is wearing, kind of thing. So the critter needs to be dependent on the vector space of the vehicle, but I don't want to do that until I've got the vehicle itself working. Okay. Game in development, synSpace Drone Runners, version 1.09. The Critter World subsection, Vehicles. So I want to be able to have critters engage with and use tools and vehicles. And Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 is going to be out soon, and sort of as a homage to that, I realized I didn't actually have a formal flight simulator class yet. So this is basically a standalone API that implements the physics part of a flight simulation. You would normally, in a real environment, you'd have an actual model of an airplane or something that you would, be using to show the user. If I have that, if I ever have that, I don't have it here. It's invisible. And what you're seeing instead is a visualization of just the airplane part. So these are the wings that the physics is using to calculate lift and drag and such. These are the control surfaces that the physics engine is using, and they're just defined by 4 points each. So there's a place you can just type in, all those numbers. But in the shortest term, I'll just make it so that the star map can have a string of numbers in it. And you can draw your plane with graph paper and work out the XYZ values of each of the points, and then type them into this script. In addition to the control surfaces themselves, of which there are 5, left wing, left elevator, right elevator, and rudder, I also have a normal vector, which is at right angles to the surface. Note that the dihedral, the bend between the two wings, causes their normals to splay out a little bit, whereas there's no dihedral in the elevators and their normals go straight down. Now the blue is my true airspeed. My goodness, are you okay, kitty? You okay? Okay. She's got some nervous energy burn out there. She just derfed off of a chair and onto a pile. Anyway, so the blue line is basically pointing, showing where I'm traveling into the wind. And so the blue line then, see, right, what I'm doing right now is I've got a throttle This is new. So I got my throttle at 100%. So the throttle is pushing me forward relative to the fuselage. And then I'm going fast enough that what happens is I'm falling with gravity, and then I hit the ground and I bounce. And so I'm just hitting the ground repeatedly and bouncing. There's no crashing. There's no lift yet. There's nothing really lifting me in the air other than if I angle up a little bit, my engines are now shoving me up in the air a bit. But I don't have enough thrust. This is kind of a Cessna, and I don't have enough thrust to just go straight up by myself on rocket power. Anyway, so that's what the blue line is. Now, so what the blue line is showing me, though, is the angle of attack between the incoming wind, there. So in that time I was going there, that's the time it should be making lift. Lift. But as soon as it drops below 18 degrees or so, boom, no lift, because it's above the wing. Lift. Anyways, this is my development strategy here. Is I develop the computation of a new force like lift, and I visualize it with these little lines, but I don't actually use it to move the plane yet. And that way I have a plane that's just moving in a straight line, other than I can reposition at different angles, and then while it's doing that, I can look at all of the little vectors and say, oh yes, that looks right. Oh yes, that is going the way I wanted it to go. And only then do I then turn it on and say, okay, like thrust, you're now allowed to do something. You lift, you're now allowed to actually lift. So it is typically, it is up in the air, but it's not flying. It's just bouncing up into the air. Right now I'm in arcade mode, so left just is yaw left, and right is just yaw right, and back is pitch up, and forward is pitch down. But once I have all of my force vectors looking right, I'll switch out of arcade mode and into FlightSim mode, at which point these control motions will only deflect the surfaces, and that will only affect the directions of the lift. Whatever lift there is on this wing is going to apply a torque to the center of mass of the system. Basically, each point that could have lift or drag has a certain computed pounds of force, which is then turned into a torque based on its distance from the center of mass, its radius. And that torque then adds together. It's a three-dimensional torque rotation. And I end up coming up with a yaw, pitch, and roll value, basically. A delta yaw, pitch, and roll angle that the forces say the plane should start rotating on each of those three axes. For each of those axes, I'll just maintain a sort of a current velocity of, and then these are accelerations for, and then just basic physics of acceleration, boosting velocity, and then velocity changing the position over time. And I'll have some sort of friction probably. Well, no, I want the aerodynamics itself to be the friction. I want drag to be the friction that restores things back to a stable situation. And kitty. Okay, I'm going to go play with the cat and or lock it out. But it looks kind of cool in its own little way, and I like the thought of, if I'm still stick figures on everything else, then a stick figure airplane is not that much of a stretch. So here, if I pitch up and down, you can see the deflection of the elevators. And what I do there is, in addition to deflecting the actual control surface, I draw a little line where its undeflected point would have been. So, I don't know, the back edge of the elevator, see how there's that line that's left behind when I move it? And ditto for rudder. Okay, rudder. Okay, and now line it up with the animal again, because I think it's more fun when you get to buy into that illusion. So it's kind of weird. It's like, the game is clearly moving an object. Is it moving the plane object and then binding critter to the plane, or is it moving the critter object and binding the plane to the critter? And it's a little of both. The critter object, when it's connected to a plane object, it has a little plane object in the programming sense inside of it. And it's telling that plane object information like, here's where I was the last time I talked to you, and here's how much time has gone by, and here's the control inputs as I have them right now, and here's a couple other facts about the weather and such. And then the simulator code, the FlightSim object inside of him goes, well, yeah, thanks. I don't know who you are, and I don't know what you are, and I don't know anything about you other than, I know your mass. And that's pretty much all I know about you, and I guess I could factor in your general aerodynamic shape if you were to tell me, but I don't do that right now. But I will just now be a dumb rock that moves through space, understanding certain principles of aerodynamics or fluid dynamics so that it works both in the air and in the water. And I will tell you where I think you ought to be and what I think your orientation ought to be. And you do with that what you feel like. And so what I do with it is I take the position information and I say, okay, my critter is now there. And then I take the orientation information and I don't do anything with it yet. But the idea is I would, in the simplest case, just apply that orientation to the critter, and he would just be like this. So he'd be in line with the plane. So the plane would be this overcoat that he's wearing. It just seems a little odd in the airplane sense. But the animation system definitely needs to be clued in so that, anytime the feet come into contact with the ground, they start, Fred Flintstoning. And what I would like a dynamic pose concept where you have in the skeletal animation system, you set up a pose, like the pose in this case of a critter that is flying this airplane, whatever that might be. A four-legged critter flying this airplane might look a lot like this, only his legs probably look more like they're just sort of dangling. But imagine if the G-forces caused wiggling in the limbs, like all four limbs suddenly sway off to the side when the G-forces are that way. And that's something that you, the artist, you say, hey, I am specifically designing what my critter looks like when affected by G-forces in the cockpit of a plane. And I see that as basically you providing the center pose of, I'm sitting in the cockpit of a plane. And then as opposed to the right of that, of the extreme pose of I'm getting pushed out of my seat to the right, I'm bending way to the right, I'm bending way to the left, I'm bending way forward, I'm bending way back, I'm falling, and therefore I kind of compress myself, or I'm shooting upwards, in which case I get kind of long. And so you provide all of these extreme poses, and then the animation system accepts an external input of the current acceleration vector, and that nudges the animation to using a blend in that direction. But the point is you do a handful of extremes, and then I make a linear interpolation between neutral and that extreme. And that's how I want to do a lot of things, like dancing and such. But I ought to prioritize doing something for flying and swimming, since I think that there's going to be a lot of that. Game-wise, Cessna Overcoat is a power-up that you would find up in grid space maybe, and pick it up and then come down here, and it would be on your belt inventory, as it were, just like my lunar landing engine. I'm thinking that to switch mounts, I would tap on the mount in question, kind of selecting it as my current weapon, and then tap it to activate it, to fire it, which would, if I'm not on it, it would, bring it out of inventory and put me on it, and it would begin, I would then be flying it, and the cockpit controls would reconfigure to be appropriate for that vehicle, and then whatever cockpit controls there were would control that vehicle with whatever physics that vehicle had, or any possession, really. You pick it up somewhere, grid space or on the ground here. It's in your you've got an inventory somewhere, and I'm pretty sure tapping on the pods here, I think that these pods are basically inventory. So I think tapping on the pods can bring me to an inventory screen someday. It's still not flying. It has real thrust that comes from my throttle. The controls are still arcade mode, that if I just pull back or push forward, it just directly immediately pitches, or if I yaw, it just immediately yaws. You can see the control surfaces move. Like if I do this, it actually is trying to roll me a little bit so that you can see the wings twist in opposite directions. But we have some new vectors. This sort of orange vector is a front vector in the plane of that surface. So for example, if you look at the rudder here and I apply some yaw, you should see the orange line move. And when I pitch, you should see those orange lines move. Moving, staying in the plane of the wing of the Aero surface. And the reason I want that is because I want to see for sure what I'm using to compute my angle of attack, which is the angle between this blue line and that orange line. So the plane of the wing in a forward direction versus the true air velocity. While we're being driven forward by the engine, we don't have any lift yet, so we're not flying, but we do have gravity pulling us to ground. So we should just be pushed along the ground, but since the ground has upward arcs, there's points in time where we're pushed upward by the ground and hurled into the air for a while. And then, we just fall with gravity. We're going pretty fast. Anyway, so our net velocity, our path, is we're going now down. We're basically going down. Oh, we're underwater. We're going down, down, down. And now we hit the ground, we pop up, and we were going up for a while, but there's nothing keeping us going up, and so we immediately start falling down again. So we're just hopping across the ground. But we can see when we would expect to see some lift. So in my simple model, lift happens as soon as the wind is hitting the wing a little bit from below, and it then increases until a maximum angle of attack is reached, at which point it cuts off suddenly. So this is working, and I could start to use this information. I could start to apply torques or even just lift. I think what maybe I'll start with is adding all the lifts together and acting them as a single force on the aggregate plane, i.e. to counter gravity, so that the plane as a whole goes up. And once that feels good, then I'll worry about the torques that they should be applying, and then I'll change the flight stick to no longer give me any direct roll and only do its real control surface function. Now, if I was really using the lift, then all of this lift would keep me from falling, and then I wouldn't be bouncing anymore, or I'd be bouncing at a different frequency in any case. Okay, I just achieved level flight for the first time. So my throttle's only like 20%, and my speed is 158 meters per second, which is, I think that's like 300 knots. It's pretty fast. So I'm going too fast. I reproportioned my wings to be a little closer to Cessna. These light blue lines going up, those are the lift lines. And you can see the forward vector and the wind vector are collinear on the primary wings. So I'm cruising with the minimum amount of lift. If I pull back a little bit, it'll the lift will increase because my angle of attack will increase. But then as the plane starts moving in the new direction, then the angle of attack goes back down to 0. But I'm now also trying to push myself up with my engines alone, and I'm slowing down to 70, 60. And eventually the angle of attack here is going to get past my maximum and the lift will disappear. And my maximum is more than a real plane. Anyway, so the lift is completely gone now. I've lost all my flight. I'm crashing. So I need to hunker down until I get back into the lift phase. There we go. And now I need to pull back and just ride that lift. Just keep it at maximum lift without losing the laminar flow, and hope that I can get upwards. I'm falling very slowly, and now I'm rising. I'm using, this is my vertical speed meter up here. If the little number is green and above the line, then it's upwards, and if it's red and below the line, then it's downwards. And the 1900 meters, that's my height above ground. But anyway, this is originally for the lunar lander module, at which point I was very concerned with height above ground as opposed to height above sea level, because I wanted to know exactly when I was going to crunch. And I think that's probably true here as well, but I'm thinking over here of having some classic airplane numbers like true airspeed and height above sea level. Anyway, okay, so I'm coming down now. My speed's down to 50. So let's see if we can go up just by speeding up. So all we're going to do is go faster. I have a pretty good angle of attack right now. Going kind of slow though. We're probably going to stall out. So let's just put it to 100%. If I'm not careful, I go back out into orbit. Okay, so I think I can see the blue line starting to come up a little bit, which is actually decreasing my lift. So just putting the throttle up by itself, well, what do I expect to have happen? I think I expect eventually to see the angle of attack get back to 0. Oh, and I'm no longer negative in my vertical speed, and I am now positive in my vertical speed. Just by doing that. And my speed now, my actual airspeed is now up to 90. Got a lot of sound effect work to do too. It feels pretty smooth though. It's only 11 frames per second, but I don't know, in this environment it feels pretty nice. So anyway, so I have lift, I have drag, I have Cessna parameters. I don't have Cessna performance, but I've looked those numbers up in a big book, so I have things I can compare to. It's possible that I've underpowered my engine. I mean, I've got it set to 110 horsepower, but that has to go through some sort of propeller simulation math to get turned into an actual thrust. And I can't say with any sort of certainty that my propeller simulation math is good. So my engine thrust is, delivered thrust to propeller maybe off by a factor of 10 or something, I don't know. Because it feels like the engine should be able to just, pull me out of a lot more problems than it does. So as you see, the right wing is stalling out. It's just riding right on the edge of stalling. And the difference is that I'm slightly tilted, right? So the angle of attack on the right wing is a little, well, it must be a little high. I mean, the blue line must be a little above the wing on that side. Anyway, every time that thing disappears, this wing should drop. Now I don't have that, Well, the way it drops is that there's a differential force, and that creates a differential torque, and that torque then causes a roll, and that's not wired in yet. But that's what it's telling me it wants to do. Because of the dihedral, the the higher wing loses lift first because of the angle. Well, it doesn't actually lose the lift, but the lift is not working directly against gravity anymore. It's working slightly off the side, whereas this one is still working directly against gravity. And that result is this wing needs to droop, needs to fall until they're in balance again. Because I want to see if, turning the plane sideways to its flight path, there's a lot of force there on the rudder being off to the side that makes it really want to drag it back to straight behind. And that's not turned on, and it'll be very different once that is turned on. Okay, a little update on the FlightSim module. Got most of the forces working now. Although I'm still working on torque, I'm still working on getting the control surfaces to behave properly. And for example, this line here that's sticking straight back, that's not right. We're gonna hit the wall. Ah! There's no collision so profound as to cause you any damage or harm at this point. It just basically ratchets us up to a new starting altitude from which we glide downwards. If we look back here, we can see that on the rudder, we're going straight into the wind, and so the lift is sometimes on the left and sometimes on the right. It's kind of going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So that's kind of cool. Right now, if I were to allow it, it would be pitching me up by driving my tail down. But I'm really enjoying this. I'm pleased that this does this. I think that's exactly the kind of uncertainty that there ought to be. Okay, my lift is that. And I'm now falling, but my speed is increasing. Okay, so if I just do this for a while, if I don't run into the mountain, I'm falling at 0.5 meters per second. I'm falling at less than 0.5 meters per second. My speed's up to 84. My speed is now 86 meters per second. I'm in level flight. So have I reached steady state? Is this my cruise? I don't think it's my intention to keep the physics lines. They're just very useful. I mean, I find I can't do physics without a visualization. I mean, I can, but it's just so much easier, especially when you're doing 3D stuff. So, if you take that tall blue vector and the backwards pointing drag vector that doesn't exist, and you add them together, you basically should get mostly this blue vector with maybe the tip being just a little bit back, and a green, so the green line should be kind of leaning back against that. But instead, it's sticking off over here. Wow, we're still flying. 89. Yeah. I don't have rho particle density changing with altitude yet either. This could be a bug in my model to world and world to model transition matrices. Model to world is well tested, and world to model I just made this morning. And it was actually kind of fun because basically if you think of a 4x4 matrix as representing the current orientation of the plane, and if you think of the current orientation of plane as being a vector basis, a three-dimensional vector basis with its very own little x, y, and z vectors as indicated by
this little group of lines here. That's the x-axis. Y points forward, and Z points up. Red, green, blue, X, Y, Z. Anyway, it is in fact flying. Oh yeah, we're going to do that. I'm going to pull back until we lose laminar flow and lose lift, exceed our maximum angle of attack. And oh, it's gone. These are my torque lines, my erroneous torque lines. Okay, there's my drag lines, and now. The way I have it set up right now is that each instance of the vehicle has its own copy of this data, the wing data, that you could change it in real time. Like, you know, if you crashed, you could do something like twist it or make it a little bigger or smaller. Anyway, and then from that moment on, you'd have to fly a plane where one wing had different lift characteristics than the other, and you'd have to compensate and maybe just some trim. For trim, since this is your yaw pitch roll basically, and I'm thinking maybe I could use taps to advance a little trim plus sign, so that you don't have to just, you know, hold the controls in a deflected position for a prolonged period of time. Okay, so I think I'm about to become personally acquainted with this mountain here. Okay, what do you think? You think I can get over there if I pull up so quickly? How fast am I going? 81. Whoa! Okay, so there I pulled up too fast. I did not hold on to the laminar flow, and I stalled out, and now I'm just slamming forward sideways with my wings at right angles to flight. Okay, mission accomplished. It is now possible to tumble out of control. I also made it so that, oops, what just happened? If you turn the throttle off, you'll eventually bounce to a stop, and the plane will sort of right itself, and then you can sort of try for a level takeoff again. And I try not to have too much rolling friction, since otherwise it's impossible to take off. But it means that I really should have brakes if I wanted to come to a stop in a reasonable period of time. Actually, I can kind of do that if I just end up in the deep water. There we go. So I'm underwater and therefore should have the higher density row, but don't. But other than that, this is a nice flat region. Okay, so there it has detected that it's done, and it's righting itself. And now it should be relatively level. I'm pulling back on this stick right now. A little more. Oh, look at that. It's actually, okay, it's just super sensitive. So doesn't that imply that at least at speed there's too much control force? But is it too much lift or too much drag? So this is without having to hold any controls, so it's almost balanced. I've got the critter hanging on now, so that he's not. He's crooked. He's on sideways, but at least now he is part of the plane. So I'm going to have one more transform between the critter and the plane, so that the critter can be sort of, if I want to, the critter can be hanging from it as opposed to being rigidly mounted on it. So it'd make better parachutes. You really don't want to stall. So I don't think I made it any better. Oh, I stalled. Can I get it back? I don't think I'm gonna get it back. Okay. But luckily, we're allowed infinite bounces. Woo! Okay. The only recovery I've found is to turn the throttle off. And I gave it a little more power in the engine, so if I go to like 70% or so, it takes off pretty fast. So we're up now. Although I don't think we're rising as fast as the mountain is rising. Woo! Well, can we survive this? So you saw the takeoff there. It's managing the wings pretty well. So I think that's pretty close to the stall angle. I moved some components around, mainly to get the elevator in line with the engine line. Okay, but now I've picked up that rotation. In theory, it could be that it's not that the critter is flying this thing, but that I am magically flying it and swooping down and picking up critters and then swooping off. And from their perspective, they're being taken up to some UFO or something. And maybe I am taking them up to my little orbiting lab and doing genetic research on them to make a better, hardier critter. Or I like this critter's attributes and I think they'll do well on another planet. So I've grabbed one and now I'm going to take off and go to a different planet and set it loose there and see what happens. Anyway, whatever that star map wants to focus on. But yeah, we could, just be a passenger service giving rides to critters. Okay, I am going to try to turn to the right. And then stop deflection and wait for a moment. Okay, and then when it starts to get level... Oh my god, it's working. Okay, do I have to cancel this turn? Yes, and... Oops! I lost my laminar flow. Oh my god, did I... Come on, come on. Come on. Well, it looked like I was doing a good job getting rid of that tilt. I just should have been paying more attention to my angle of attack. It's like a swing. Like, yeah, like this attitude here. I mean, we're going that direction. There is drag on all these surfaces, and I'm not behaving aerodynamically. I mean, the drag should cause it to flatten on like that, and the drag should cause it to flatten out like that. So there's still something fundamentally wrong in there. Okay, so I made it so that if you push stop, it will stop it, and whenever it stops, yeah, he's walking because he's on the ground. So he's still planting seeds and stuff, right? So if we crash or land, we end up leaving behind some plants, which I love that kind of emergent behavior. I like, here's some right now growing up. It's like a little reminder of the critter that crashed here. But now that we're back on the ground, and I put in an overpowered engine, if I take I just realized that my throttle doesn't take effect until I let go. I gotta fix that. So if I just take the throttle up to 70%, and now it's kind of cool because I can wait and then I say go, he'll take off right away. And if I watch my angle of attack, which you can see here between the angle between the blue and the orange. The orange is in the plane of the wing, the plane of the surface, and the blue is the true air direction, true air velocity, true air. Yeah, so I'm just trying to keep that angle. I have it set right now to stall out around 20 degrees, which is pretty generous, but even then it's pretty hard. And watch our speed. Like if we're getting slower and slower, then we're chasing disaster. But we're holding our speed. We look pretty calm here. So here we are, and what do our wings look like? Okay. Now, do you remember when we started this film? I'll have to go back and check. Were we turning to the right before? I think we were. Going 59 knots, which is starting to seem like that's kind of my top speed. It's like if I try to go faster, the drag builds up as well as the speed, and they cancel each other out. And I modeled this after a Cessna 172, roughly. So when you crash, you bounce, and as you bounce, each time you bounce, your rotation is modified a little bit. Not necessarily in a physically correct way, but it looks pretty nice as you're bouncing around on the side of the mountain. Eventually you come to a stop. It's okay. Now once it's on the ground, it rights itself. Dunk, 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 dunk. Ooh, it's magical. I should also make it that if you're on the ground, then you should be able to walk around like a critter that's just wearing the airplane. The airplane should just kind of roll around like it's on the ground. I pulled back, so it's backwards from what I laboriously finally said. I push forward and they go down. They go down. So if the wind is coming straight back, then that's making that above the wind, which is what I want. So if I push up like this, I'm asking for lift vector pointing down, which is going to lift my tail and thus move my nail. Yeah, so I push forward and my nose goes down. Okay, here we go. We take off, and I push forward and my nose goes down. But look how it's all oscillating. Whoopee, 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 whoopee. And my speed. Okay, well, let's see if we can turn. Nope, I didn't do it right. Or it was horrible. Anyway, I'm now crashing again. So this time I'll turn the engine off. Make sure that we've made it to the ground. Recover. Like I can't even rotate, I can't even change the heading now. I have to take off into this mountain. Okay, but we're just gonna do a little bit of that. Okay, just a little bit. So I gotta decide what I want to use for an AOA meter. Oh. Okay, well, actually, just as long as I don't lose my angle of attack, I can smash through the mountain as much as I like. Okay, alright. And I want it to be stable. I mean, well, it is, right? It's not like I mean, it's working. The tail is going up and down, apparently, enough to maintain, you know, a level flight between the tail and the engine. And then the wing has a fixed camber relative to that, so it achieves an angle of attack that provides lift, and that lift is proportional to the amount of usable area, and it is shown here as these long lines. But we don't see any such lines in the back here, like on the elevator. They are directly behind, in line with the source of force, the engine, so camber would not help. It would make the plane constantly want to pitch. So this is a success. And now if I just say I want to pull back, I want to go up a little bit, this should take that down a little bit. And when I let go, I restore the surface. But during the time that it was deflected, I changed reality. I got a little bit of velocity in a different direction, and that changed my blue line, the wind line, and that changed my lift situation, and that then provided some additional rotations, and some of that stuff then oscillates back and forth, and I have Mr. Wobbly plane. Okay. Every time I touch the ground, it's a bounce. It slows me down a little bit. Yeah, because basically what I'm doing is I'm kind of visualizing this pry bar of torque being applied to this thing that can spin, and there's probably some rules I'm not obeying, like the torque is only able to spin it up to a certain amount, and if it's already spinning that much, then the same torque would not increase the spin. I'm gonna have to do some book learning on torque. I kind of avoided torque. I don't know why. It seems really interesting now. It's like I don't think I was interested in rotation until music analysis, you know, synthetic music, and I wasn't interested in vector-based and linear algebra until I realized that's where flight simulators come from. But I haven't done a flight simulator in many years, so I want this to be my best math ever. Okay, this time watch your angle of attack. Okay. Ah! Okay, power off. Wait for it to bounce back. And so what I do is I decided I know I'm in contact with the ground. I know I have come to a stop. So this would be a good time to have the plane have like gravity settle out the difference in the plane. And rather than do an honest simulation of gravity pulling and having torque to rotate it around, I just said, well, I'd like it to be upright. And so I got a local upright vector, which was just up and should have been a, you know, surface normal, but I'm just using literally up. And I do a dot product between that and the up axis of the plane itself. And that gives me the cosine of the angle between those two lines, which if the thing was completely upright, the angle between them would be 0. And so the cosine of 0 would be 1. So if I get a value of 1, I say, oh, I'm already upright, I don't have to do anything. But if I get a value that's different from 1, I need to rotate it in some way to make it come back upright. But to rotate it, I need basically an axis to rotate around and a number of, radians or degrees to rotate. I take those two vectors that are not, I measure, I do the dot product first, and if the result is not 1, I know that there is an angle between them. And so I do the cross product of the two vectors, and that gives me a third vector that's at right angles to both of them. And then I say, well, that would make a great axis to rotate through. And then I already know that this angle, so I just rotate some percentage of that distance around this axis. Okay, here it is running on a Pixel 3a. Or I guess it's a Pixel 3 XL, sorry. I don't remember what it's called, Pixel 3. So I can get into a pretty stable turn. It's a pretty tight turn. A two-player game, but I can't see the other guy's plane yet. So we're not deflecting any of our control surfaces. I'm going to take the rudder and I'm going to start at 50%-ish, 60%-ish, which won't take effect till I let go, which is a bug, but I kind of like it. It gives you sort of that launch off the deck of an aircraft carrier thing. It's an acceleration. So I've got some lift. There goes my shadow. So I'm airborne. And we're still underwater, right? So the seabed's the only really flat area on the planet. So it makes the best airport. Now what I'm going to do is provide a substantially larger value for rho, the particle density number, when I'm, for any aero surface that is below sea level. So is there any chance I can correct this wing tilt? Yep, so I'm going to spin out of control to my doom again. Bounce, bounce, bounce. Take off at 60 or so %. And we're already in the air and we're in the clear. So let's give it some more throttle. What does that do? It increased our... We pitched up a little. What happens if I try and force this down into level flight? Get that angle of attack lower. Forward. So let's cut the throttle down to 20%. Should check that. So I admit that this is giving me some pleasure. A little airplane flying along. I mean, this is totally not canned. It's going to react to the mountain. Bumpity, 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 bumpity. Gets basically gets a little push up in Z, but it gets a bunch of rotations at the same time, and it corrects them all just by feedback from the lift on the wings, on the control surfaces. I've only got 5 aero surfaces. I've got 2 large wings. They're providing the longest green lines, the most lift. and then these three control surfaces that just, that, you know, you can see them, it's little green bits. It's very small little green lift forces. You see, as the tail goes back and forth, I don't know if you can tell, but the green goes to the left side or the right side, the left side or the right side. Yeah. And the engine right now, all the thrust is, the center of mass is by definition down here at the point of this red, green, blue basis vector. This is my vector basis. This is where I am. If there's an XYZ that says where the plane is, it's at this point. I mean, this is the part of the plane that's at that point. So it's this part of the plane that touches the ground when we land. So this is where the wheels are, basically. I am going to redo my computation of angle of attack, which currently is the angle between this orange line and that blue line. So my goal is basically just to get the angle between a line, the blue line, and a plane, the plane of the wing. And to do that, I can actually do the simplest possible thing. I can take the normal of the wing, and I can do the dot product of the normal with the wind vector, and that'll give me the acute angle, the smallest angle between the normal and the wind vector. And then I know that that is all part of a greater right angle to the plane of the wing, and so therefore if I just take 90 degrees minus that angle, I'll get the angle that we see here between the orange and the blue, i.e. my angle of attack, the thing I want to use to derive all my lift from. I have to also consider the sign of the original dot product, because if that's positive or negative, it tells me if the wind is hitting the bottom or the top of the wing, and that basically tells me whether the lift is going to be going up or down. We're going to start off like this with an eye on the main wing lift. So we're going to go at 50%-ish. Okay, and there's lots of lift. Lots of lift. Okay, see if we can slide up this mountain. I pull back and keep it pulled back. And what happens? It's acting like I'm still turning to the left a little. Okay, now I'm turning to the right. More. Okay, now I'm turning to the left more. Oh! Okay, well. Let's give it more power. 100%. And we are climbing. Yeah, we just finally made it out of the water. That's funny. Oh, shoot. Okay, well, that's actually kind of promising. And I really want a button to cancel my rotation. I'll take off at 69%. We took off right away. They look all nicely trimmed. Our angle of attack looks credible for lift. We've got nice strong lift. Very symmetric between the two sides. Coming out of the water. A great undersea airport. This is what the aliens are doing. and I'm rising at 3.2 meters per second. And my velocity is 54 knots. So I'm starting to pick up a slight turn to the right. So I'm gonna pulse to the left, and then to the right, and then back off. Okay, I added smoke trails. So this is camera looking up above. Here's the airplane there. And it's been reasonably level. And I think it's about time to make it look like there's some weapons. I know it's kind of silly, but the description of this plane is of a series of 5 arrows, 5 objects, each one starting with a code number that tells what kind of thing it is. I'm a wing-like thing, I'm a rudder-like thing, I'm an elevator-like thing. Well, I think I can add additional things that you could be like. You could be an engine-like thing, or a weapons mount-like thing, or possibly even a very specialized, if I'm going to have a tractor beam, it should go here. If I'm going to be driven by a character, their seat should go here. I'm assuming that they're going to be located about here on me. And here's my saddle, as it were, that they are sitting in or suspended from. Maybe that's a primitive that I should provide, actually. How is pilot connect? Maybe there's both a pilot slot and a payload slot. I would like to be able to drag fellow players around. Yeah, we'll think of it as pilot versus payload. Or pilot, passenger, and payload. 3 Ps of airplanes. But anyway, the point is that this particular vehicle might also include an engine node, which basically just tells me where the thrust comes from. And it's also going to, I guess, be where the exhaust comes from. So right now it's coming from that origin, supposedly. Pretty good visibility from a distance, though. Alright, so let's try some aileron stuff. In this kind of a plane, the official way to turn is to bank quite a bit, but don't lose lift. And then stop your bank, and then pull back, don't lose your lift. Okay, I'm definitely going in a different heading. And now I'm crashing. Okay, cheat. Yeah, I'd say I got a ways to go here before it's as flyable as I'd like. Also, in theory, I wired up the camera button now so that I can tap it to switch to a different camera view. And this second camera view is just to be synced to the plane, or at least to the heading of the plane. And that's not working either. So I'm having a pretty high failure rate on my new code, unfortunately. But that's nice. Whoa! Oh, I'm bouncing. I'm directly below it, looking up and from the ground as it comes down, bounces again and again. Let's turn the engines off, or it won't do that forever. Now, I think that what I'm going to do is every bounce is going to estimate the amount of damage. You know, it's like the airplane doesn't really know much about the world. It's really focused on itself. But it does it's the one that tells me when it hit the ground. And then it's the one that can kind of put those forces into terms that it understands to say, okay, that was, 5% damage. If you are in fact caring about this and you want to add it up, then you're 5% of your way to being a destroyed airplane. And then the plane basically sends a message to the Lua engine on the star map saying, hey, plane X just took 5% damage. And then it's up to the star map to say, oh well, what's 5% damage between friends, and just ignore it. Or to keep track and eventually say, no, your plane has been destroyed and you must now suffer the punishment on this star map. So I guess that's my instant replay.
Instant replay?
Well, the smoke trail allows me to see what recently I did. So it's not actual instant replay, but I can see I came down and then I started bouncing along this mountain. Bounce, 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 bounce. And I ended up on the floor of the Most people don't get to keep flying after they crash. My rubber plane is very accommodating. Which might be you get a new plane at the same location you just crashed on, or it could be you return to orbit on this planet, so you're up in the sky but still looking down on the same dirt, and as soon as you push the stop button or the re-entry button, you'll be assigned a new plane or vehicle or whatever landing craft is provided on that map at that time to that character. Okay, so I just took off with a lot of throttle, and I'm smacking into the ground now and then, and every time I smack into the ground, it rotates me a little. Well, that's about right. So taking off feels pretty good. So what was wrong with turning? If I just move the stick a little bit, does it rotate too fast? No, it's really slow. I've really made that slow. And now I turn back. So I definitely changed my heading there. Oh, I gotta cancel it. Still, I like the simplicity of the camera work in general. And in case I've never actually said this, you can start pretty much in any clear area. And down here, like for example, there are buttons down here, so that's not a clear area, so you can't do it there. But just above them, to pretty much everywhere there's not, well actually even on the plane you can do it, because that's not a touchable object yet. Is there a visual clue for what's a touchable object? Not really. Maybe brighter color right now, in which case you'd think the plane would be. Anyway, you start somewhere and then you drag up, down, and it's nicer at a higher frame rate, obviously, left, right, and this isn't affecting your flight or anything. All it's doing is changing the camera angle. And at this point, I can touch any other controls I want, so long as I maintain my contact on the screen. Is that real? No. I can keep doing it. Sorry if that's making you sick. Hey, I like it when you're going in a circle and you see your smoke trail. Oh, no, see, it looks like I'm flying, but I'm still actually just moving the camera. To fly, you have to start inside the joystick. No button contact counts unless it starts inside the button. And if you are outside of all buttons, then you can do camera movement. And that goes for pinch zoom also. Your fingers have to start outside of any buttons. But then once you've started the zoom, your fingers are allowed to stray into any buttons you like. And so if there's some pleasure that comes from seeing the critter actually doing is animating. For example, if the critter were dangling from this thing, and then I flew low enough that the critter's feet won't hit the ground, I'd like to see a reaction. I'd like to see at least him lift his feet to avoid it, and then once it's inevitable, to Fred Flintstone as fast as he can. And likewise, I'd like to be able to seamlessly drop my rope and snag a critter or drop one off. Which kind of implies I should probably be flying a lot more slowly. As an excuse to be able to hover directly over a critter. Flying saucer, helicopter. Now I am going to probably be limited to these line drawings for this. I don't know that I'm willing to open the can of beans of skinning on this.